Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the Head of Marketing at Infotools. Today, we're joined by Sean McDade, Ph.D, CEO and founder of PeopleMetrics, a full-service market research firm focused on customer experience and custom research panels. Sean is a best-selling author and entrepreneur with 20 plus years of experience in the market research industry. Sean's first book, Listen or Die, shares 40 lessons to get the very most out of customer feedback. Sean's second book, Pharma Customer Experience, dives into the experiences patients have with pharma and what those in the pharma space can do to improve those experiences. A third book, titled The Psychology of Physician CX, looks at the relationship between doctors and pharmaceutical companies in this post-COVID world. This book will be released in April 2024. Thanks for joining us on the show today, Sean.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Michael. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. So, Sean, what's the most significant thing that you're going to share with us today?
I think there's a lot we could talk about, but what I'm most passionate about these days is getting clients data that they can trust so they can make the best decisions possible based on the research findings. And what we're finding, Michael, is that with certain audiences, especially hard to reach audiences such as, say, B2B decision makers, IT decision makers, certain physician specialties, it's really hard to find them in the traditional mode that you might look via research panel suppliers, sample suppliers, if you will. And there's an alternative way that we've been working with clients on to make that data really, really sound that I'm really excited to talk about. We call it custom research panels.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit more about these custom research panels? Perhaps your area of expertise has led you into taking such a position as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working in the industry a long time, and in the customer experience world, there's typically the way we're getting sample is it's real customer data. So we're looking at transactional information from a customer. Say a customer calls a call center, the client has a record of that. So we're using the real customer data to get that feedback. So that's not a problem, right? So you can believe that data, it's coming internally from the client, it's internal sample. I think what the challenge becomes, Michael, is when we're doing market research type work, we don't have that transactional data, or it's just not appropriate to use. It's how do we get a representative group of people who we can talk to answer some of these strategic questions. So I'm not talking about like a general consumer. I'm talking about, say, a benefits broker or a financial advisor or an oncologist or someone who it's a pretty narrow definition of who they are. There's not lots and lots of them in the world. And perhaps the client wants to understand like the broad market. So not just their customers, but maybe their competitors' customers too. So how do you get these people? How do you know it's them? And how can you be confident in the findings? Because here's the thing. There is a dirty secret in market research these days. And it's the online sample that's available out there can be unreliable for certain audiences. And there's been studies that have found that up to half of what you get from an online panel provider is not accurate or is not useful data. There's been these studies that have been done on the legitimate studies, Michael, where 5 surveys have been sent out to 5 different panel providers, and they looked closely at the information that came back. And it's disturbing, the results, frankly, for certain audiences. Things like a concept that should take a minute to read was read in 3 seconds. Like fictitious brands are recognized and are familiar at 39%. Almost 4 out of 10 people recognizing brands that don't exist. And you're like, well, what's going on? How can you trust that data? And maybe for large consumer audiences is okay, but when you have a small subset of customers that you absolutely need to know about, it just doesn't work. You can't throw out a third of your sample, or more, and hope to get any kind of conclusions. So that level of frustration led us to something where we said, well, why don't we create custom proprietary panels for our clients, right? So especially if they have like an audience that's hard to reach and needs to be verified, why don't we do that? And then they'll have a panel to talk to whenever they want.
It sounds good. And from what we've been hearing and just experiencing as well, it seems like all consumers are becoming hard to reach. So it's not something necessarily that's just for business to business or for niche organizations as well. There has been an overall, I guess, increase in busyness that people have, and that people are time poor these days. So a whole reasons. Do you know why? Why do you think some of those that has happened in the world that we've seen?
Well, I think you've touched on it just now, Michael. I think there's a couple things going on. We know that people are harder to reach, especially those as you get narrower and narrower in terms of segments. They're harder to reach. Response rates for normal surveys are continuing to go down. So, it's hard to know how many completes you're going to get or how long it's going to take to get the number of completes you need, even if you believe that the people you're talking to are you want to talk to. And I think it's around speed of research too, right? Like it's not going away, this need for some quick turn studies, right? We know it's been happening in the industry for quite a while, but those quick turn studies, they still have to trust the data these studies come from, right? So what we found is these panels add a few layers of value for clients. One, they can trust that when they go out to do the research, it's who they say they are. So we go to great lengths, Michael, to make sure of that. Like we'll check via LinkedIn, we'll do spot phone calls, we'll interact with them face to face and ask them questions. We do more extensive screening questions than most panel providers, just to make sure they are who they say they are. And they also are agreeing to participate for a limited amount of time. So they're not in this panel forever. It's usually a year. And they commit to a year, and they commit to providing a certain number of feedback sessions, whether they be in-depth interviews, focus groups, or quantitative surveys, right? So it's one of those things. So they're always available. And once you get them and you get them engaged, then the organization can go out quickly and get feedback in ways that they just couldn't any other way. And the more they use the panel, the greater the ROI on this, obviously. Like you wouldn't want to create one of these and just use it for one time. That wouldn't make any sense. But if you're consistently going after the same audience and asking questions, it's just makes a ton of sense.
No, for sure. So how do you navigate around the anonymity and privacy that we see in traditional research?
Definitely. So there's a couple of things on this. One, we, meaning PeopleMetrics, are the ones who are managing and maintaining these panels, right? So we're not sharing any kind of individual level responses with our client, and the client agrees to that. So there's that. The other side to that coin, though, is there are certain panels that the client wants their brand to be anonymous. So they don't want anybody to know that it's them sponsoring this panel. So what we've done in that case is we create a branded panel that is a unique brand that we create. And we offer it as this is an opportunity to provide feedback on this industry. Let's say it's the insurance industry or for financial advisors. This is the kind of feedback we're looking for. And if you're interested in joining, this is what you get. And, these people certainly get compensated for their participation at varying levels, depending on kind of what we're asking them to do. So then it's anonymous at two levels. It's, we're not going to share individual responses to our sponsor client, and the respondents don't even know who the sponsor client is. So why would that be good? Well, it gets truly unbiased competitive landscape type research data, which is, can be really valuable.
Yeah, true. So do you feel that this approach is something that's just limited to healthcare, or you see it being across other walks of life as well?
I mean, first of all, I think if it's a specialty type audience, then that's absolutely something people should do. Like, definitely B2B, definitely, some specialty healthcare areas, but it absolutely expands beyond healthcare. It expands to, I would argue, the low-hanging fruit is any kind of B2B kind of audience that you're regularly going out to. I would absolutely have a panel. And even if you're just pulling lists, like you might say, oh, well, I'll just pull from our CRM and I'll do it that way. Having 300, 400, 500 people committed to give you feedback for a year that represents your market is much better than that approach, because they're much more willing to provide your feedback because they know they're in something, they're getting paid for it, they know, and they know there's an expectation of terms of what they're going to provide. So you're going to get higher response rates that way. But to answer your question, it should go across industry. And I think you made the point earlier, Michael, that it probably should even go down to any kind of audience that you regularly want to talk to, that you want to have confidence is truly who they say they are. There's an argument that a custom panel, proprietary panel for a client is something to consider.
Sure. So I guess following on from this, are there any instances where you would opt not to do a custom, so an online panel over a custom panel?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's a one-off only, you're not going to go back to that audience in a regular fashion. And that then it makes sense to go the panel provider route, but just keep your eyes open on the data quality coming back. I would have questions that you're asking to check to make sure that people are paying attention to what you're asking them to do. So maybe ask questions in two different ways throughout the survey. Ask familiarity to unrecognizable brands. And I know you might say, wow, this is a lot to do, and I don't want to waste the audience's time. However, it's not worth getting it back if 40% of it is garbage, right? So you don't, like, that defeats the purpose. So you're almost like, it almost becomes an academic exercise in some ways, where back in graduate school, we used to always do this. We used to have, trying to test scales, and we would try to figure out like, or is this data valid? It's really a validity question. Like, is your data valid? And so, yeah, to answer your question, if you're only going to go out one time, and especially if it's an audience that these online panel providers have lots of people in, that makes a lot of sense. I would still do it that way. Or if you're doing just pure transactional customer experience work, where let's say you're surveying after a guest checks out of the hotel, or after someone visits your bank, or someone buys a new car, and it's something where you're just continuously measuring that touch point, then you can certainly, I think, make sense to just use your transactional data system, whatever that is, CRM or some other point of purchase system that allows you just to continually get that data, survey it, and get it back. So I don't think custom panels are necessarily good for CX in many ways, but for research, market research, I think they're exceptionally valuable. One of our clients, Michael, calls it their secret weapon. Yeah, nice. Their custom research panel. They feel like it's a competitive advantage in their industry against competitors who are not using such an approach.
Yeah, it definitely requires that multi-pronged approach, doesn't it? So,
without,
yeah, interesting thinking. Just in terms of your ROI, or your cost per response. For instance, so if you were to do an online panel, and if you do have some of that quality, which you do have to discard, your cost per response actually increases, and it's probably quite even with what you would do with a get from a custom panel, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think of it. There is an investment in the custom research panel, right? There's an investment in the recruiting and creation of it and vetting of them and making sure they are who they say they are. So let's say, and these range in size from, we have some around 300 and we have one that's almost 5,000 people, right? So it's a big range, but I think most of them, at least in the B2B space, and even a B2C, if you want to represent a sample, can be like 300 to 700, and you've got plenty. But yeah, you're investing up front to create it, to vet it, and to get them engaged. But then as you do each research project, your cost per complete and cost per research project goes down because there's no re-recruiting. And there's no, there's that whole part of it is much more limited, and you're not spending on that. And yeah, so you're realizing economies of scale the more that you use it.
Oh, sure. So what are some of your key decision points or factors that you take into account when forming a panel?
Yeah, I mean, there are several of them. One, I think we touched on already, is it going to be branded or not? So is the client going to be identified, or is it going to be an anonymous panel? So that's a huge decision because it requires, changes in communication and how you recruit, et cetera. I'd say like 80% of our panels are client sponsored and brand known, simply because it's easier, and they want to have a relationship with these customers. I mean, that's one of the benefits of it is, they see this company, this pharmaceutical company, this insurance company, this bank, whoever it is, caring enough about them to put them in this group for a year or so. And so that's definitely a key decision point. The number of participants in the panel is another big one. Again, you want as few as you need to in order to represent your market, right? So, but you want, because that it does cost money to have them in there. And then there are, then there's a variety of other things, like how long do you want them to be in this panel? Like a year is our typical recommendation, but we've seen some that are 6 months, and we've had others that are 18 months or 2 years commitment. And then how many times are you going to ask them to participate in research? So typically for a year type panel, we'll ask them to participate at least 4 times, sometimes 6 times, but it won't all be, in-depth interviews that are 45 minutes. Sometimes it'll be a short 10-minute or less quantitative survey, right? So there is a balance to all of this. So yeah, those are some of the factors that, I would look at before, and then who's going to be in it? Like, that's the number one question. Like, what is your ideal target audience? And are there criteria that would eliminate them? So financial advisors, for instance, is there some sort of minimum amount of assets under management that you would need in order for them to be in this panel, right? So it's just like trying to figure out your audience and what's the ideal, mix to put in.
And what about from an output perspective or an outcome, business challenge, etc.? How do you normally lead that discussion?
In terms of like what do you get? What are some of the outputs from the panel?
Well, what are the customers, the clients looking to actually do as a result of the survey?
Oh yeah. Okay. Right. So varied uses. Sometimes it's lots of quick studies that they want to get done in a very timely, cost-effective manner at a high quality and a high level. Sometimes they're using it for an NPS type relationship measure, and they want to check that over the year just to make sure that they're, moving in the right direction. And a lot of it, Michael, is custom market research topics, such as, market landscape, pricing, messaging, new concepts that they're thinking of, whatever you can think of from a research perspective that you'd like to ask them. You do. And then what's your quantitative qualitative mix? So we do a lot of qualitative with these panels, and we also use it for quantitative as well. So, you think about, like, I've got these folks at my beck and call to be able to answer whatever question comes up that I need answered. And that's sort of what happens. And that's the value of it. That's why it's a secret weapon. It's like, I've got these people, I can get this answer quickly, and I know who I'm getting the answer from.
So how do you keep the panel engaged then over the year?
One of the most important things that we do is panel engagement. And the first thing that keeps someone engaged is them feeling like they are providing value, right? So actually having things for them to do is a huge way to engage them. So having opportunities for them to participate in research, and again, they don't get paid if they don't participate, right? So they want to have opportunities typically. And it's how it's positioned up front. Like, the communication that goes out, what is the quality of that? Is the sponsor, if it's a sponsored one, part of that communication, and are they integrated into that communication? When they are, you find engagement goes way up. Are they getting this is a key thing, Michael, are you sharing findings with the group? So we make it a point to share findings that we have at a high level, not realizing our clients like strategic initiatives or anything, but at a high level, we're able to share what we're finding from this research. So this group, this panel, becomes smarter in their job. And that's part of the pitch in the beginning. Is this isn't just providing feedback one way. This is a two-way dialogue where you're going to learn what your peers think and how they're thinking about issues that are relevant to the industry. And then I think just being human with them. I mean, we talked about like humans being so important, like answering their questions, being responsive to them when they have questions about what's the upcoming schedule, and just connecting with them that way, and then thanking them sincerely at the end. Sort of summary of everything we learned. Those are all keys to engaging the panel.
I'm sure some people will be surprised where they thought they would have been in the middle of the bell curve, but they're actually quite to the extreme on some side. Really? I would have thought other people would have thought the same way as I do as well.
Absolutely. You see that all the time. And again, that's learning, and that's like perspective and a reference point. You get to see kind of where your reference point is. Is the reference point, like you as a reference point, is it, like you said, in the middle, or are you on the bell curve somewhere at the end?
True. So what are some of the learnings that you've had? Like, how has this made you a better market researcher, by I guess doubling down on such an initiative?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many ways, and there's so many ways to answer that question. One, I think we've become much more cognizant, Michael, on how, you hear the saying garbage in, garbage out, but until you actually see it, and then you see how quality in, quality out works, you start becoming a believer. And just understanding how important data quality is right now in the industry. And no more important, you can have the greatest design and the greatest analytical plan and the most beautiful infographic, but if it's from data that you don't believe in, none of that matters. So that's got to be the first rung. Like if you had a Maslow's hierarchy, that's the first one. The quality data has to be there. And I think I've gotten to be a much better researcher just by appreciating that in today's world. And two, I've seen with my own eyes clients get tremendous value from this. Like doing research that would cost them definitely double what we would charge if they did a bunch of bespoke one-offs versus bringing them together in this panel. And I would argue that quality is you can't really measure the value of that. Just in terms of the cost, though, it's less. And we're seeing decisions made on topics that really are important to clients quickly, like a new design of a website, a new marketing message, a financial new compensation plan for financial advisors that a client was considering, that they were able to get understanding and change and make happen quickly. There's just so many examples of how this delivers ROI and does so quickly. And let's face it, we're in a society that's really, really fast these days, and I don't think that's going away. And this allows quality quick decision making, not reckless quick decision making based on suspect data.
Yeah, true. So, can you share a success story from one of your clients who've used a custom research panel that's helped them get the most out of their research budget and impacted their business in a positive way?
I mean, these are all proprietary, so I can't share names, because they all look at them as, they look at them as their own, and don't share this. But I can talk in some generalities.
Cool.
And I think I've mentioned a few of these already, but having when you have the marketing team pushing to change a website and they want to launch it, and the research team says, hey, we really want to make sure the messages work first before doing that. We showed this design to the panel, and it just didn't resonate at all. They went back, tweaked it, came back to that panel like 2 weeks later, and then they gave it thumbs up. And then the site became extremely popular and well received going forward within a matter of just a little bit of time. Those type examples happen all the time. And it's just about any kind of research topic you can imagine, it being a quality outcome in a quick period of time. It's I love seeing those success stories, and there are quite a few of them.
Very true. So in the intro, I mentioned that you've got another book coming out. It's very exciting. Can you tell us about this book and how it relates to what we've been talking about today?
Yeah, and it's looking at how doctors or physicians have experiences changed post-COVID with their interactions with pharmaceutical companies. And these are primarily specialty physicians. So, the pharmaceutical industry has really morphed into a specialty drug industry, meaning the generics have taken out all of the margin for common type disease. The specialty drugs are the ones that are really hard to discover, and they have small patient populations that they treat, but they tend to generate quite a bit of revenue. And unfortunately, the pharmaceutical companies, for the most part, have continued to market to physicians like they were, 20 years ago, when they're pushing, cholesterol medication and hypertensive medication, things that are, have jingles next to them, we like to say in the book, versus really helping the doctor understand the disease state, understand the different options, and help their patients onboard onto new medication. So we wrote this book to understand how that specialty physician is operating in today's world. And it relates to what we're talking about because they are a great example of an audience that, if you want to understand something consistently from them, say oncologists, they are a unique set of people who, if you created a custom panel and you had enough research to do with that panel, makes a lot of sense to create one for just a specific targeted prescriber group and understand kind of what their experience is like or what their opinions are on different kind of aspects of what you're offering today. It's an exciting book, Michael. It's one that I'm co-authoring with Richard Vandeveer, who's, a legend in the market research space, especially in the United States. And he and I are so excited to get this out to the world because I think it's going to open up some eyes on kind of the approach that's been taken to these physicians need to change. it has to be high value add, or they're just not going to even take meetings anymore with reps. Like the days of the rep knocking on the door and chatting for 20 minutes is over, and handing some samples. They have to add value. They have to help the doctor help their patients. And if they can't do that, so that's kind of in a weird way how it connects to our topic. But they are really hard to reach sample that if you want to talk to, I would create a custom panel for them. That is a pharmaceutical.
No, so where did you get the idea from writing the book on? Is it something that had been just floating in your mind, or interesting to know?
Yeah, I like to say that after my first book, Listen or Die, I vowed never to write another book. And I don't know, it's like after you get away from it for a while, you don't remember how tough it is. And then I wrote a second book, which was it was called Pharma Customer Experience. It was really on the patient experience. That was the unit of analysis. And I still believe the patient is pharma's ultimate customer. And we talked a lot about the experience they have, especially rare disease patients with specialty products, and the system and how to sort of onboard onto those medications. But the physician really was almost an afterthought in the book. And then Richard Vandeveer, my co-author, called me, and he's an expert in physicians. And he said, Sean, there needs to be a book written to fill in your second book. And I'm like, yes, there is. So that's when we got to work, and we focused on, pharma's other customer. We call them co-customers, physicians and patients for pharma.
And I suppose if there was going to be a fourth, dare I say it, possibly an FDA or a government type angle on experience as well, because it's kind of the last piece in it, isn't it?
Yeah, we talk a lot about, I mean, every industry, every regulated industry has challenges to delivering an experience that unregulated industries don't. But can still think about how it feels to be a human going through what those people are going through, especially patients, and even the doctors, because we know the doctors feel the patient's pain, especially the ones that are, they're their partner when they're going through these really tough disease states. And we feel there's still a lot pharma can do to improve those experiences, both for the patient and the physician. And to their credit, they're trying really hard. Like, there's support groups, patient support services for patients now that are onboarding onto specialty drugs. The doctors love those patient support groups, and it's a way to really improve the experience for the physician and the patient. But there's a long way to go. And they're not hospitality also typically isn't their mindset, but I think it will need to be going forward.
No, we digress a little, but it was really fascinating just to see how the pharma community just gathered around the COVID response. And you may agree or disagree with the decisions that were made in terms of how that was administered, etc. But the partnerships that were around was pretty good to see, and hopefully some of that maintains is ongoing as well.
Yeah, I mean, in both my books, I talk about how pharma is the one industry where, they have the worst reputation for doing the most for people. And a lot of that is self-inflicted in the way they approach things. And those things, I think, can be changed. I mean, who knows what we'd look like today if it wasn't for the way that they did rally, and provide at least hope that there could be a time where we could all get on a plane without masks and we could all come together and hug each other. 3 years ago, we would be like, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But yes, here we are, right? It happening. So I would encourage anybody to, check out those books if you're looking to understand any of that in more depth. And that could be another podcast, obviously, altogether.
For sure. So any final pearls of wisdom you want to leave with us, Sean?
Yeah, just that, hey, market researchers are doing really important work. I'm a really big believer in what we do as an industry. We're answering the tough questions that allow decisions to be made on behalf of our customers, right? So we are, in some ways, we are the conduits of the customer, right? And it's a beautiful thing, but it isn't beautiful if you're talking to someone who you think's a customer and they're not. They're either fooling you, or it's a bot, or it's something else where people are just doing this stuff for money. And it's our job as researchers, first and foremost, to get data that we know is correct and we can believe in. And these custom panels is one way to do that. And, the other question the audience might say is, well, what's the difference between these panels and these communities that are out there? There's all these communities. They're like cousins of each other, Michael. Communities talk to each other, and there's a lot of interaction. There could be online interaction. There could be, people are meeting. We generally are not doing that. We are just focused on, let's get a representative group of people together to answer questions for the purposes of research. So that's just another kind of angle to this. And there's a lot of software companies in the community space, and we don't, we're agnostic to all that. Just the wisdom is just make sure the findings that you're presenting, you're confident are the people you think you talk to.
That's right. And the other thing about communities is they're good and they have an absolute value, but it is a portion of society that are happy and are willing to be engaged in those as well. So keeping your avenues open is important too.
You're self-selecting with those, like you said, because of that. Some people just don't want to do that, but they're very happy to share their opinions in like a context of a survey or a focus group or an IDI, right? Like, so that's a very different group of people. So yeah, I think anytime you get customers together, some way, shape, or form, to extract insights from them and knowledge, and then exchange it back and make them smarter, that's a good deal for everybody, whether that be a community or an online a custom research panel.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Sean.
Pleasure.
And
it was really fun. Great questions. I really enjoyed it.
Cheers. I appreciate the time. Thank you also to those who have listened in today as well. If you have liked what you've heard, feel free to check out Sean McDade at PeopleMetrics. Be able to pretty quickly come up with his book as well on Google or Bing or however you search. Feel free to share this podcast with others as well. Subscribe to it or even leave a review so other people can find it as well. Until next time, thanks for listening to Now That's Significant.